My younger sister always wanted everything I had. My clothes. My friends. Even my dreams. Then she tried to steal my fiancé. She never expected what happened next. My name is Hannah Brooks. I am 29 years old, and for most of my life I believed that being the older sister meant something. It meant going first, absorbing the hard lessons so my little sister would not have to, setting an example even when nobody was watching, and putting the family's peace above my own feelings whenever the two came into conflict. I did not resent that role. I chose it, over and over, without ever really asking myself if it was fair. Sophie is 26. She is my sister, and I love her, or at least I loved the idea of her for a long time, the idea I kept carefully polished in my mind even as the real version of her kept chipping away at it. From the time she was small, Sophie wanted what I had. Not because she needed it, but because I had it. My clothes disappeared from my closet and reappeared, worn and stretched, back in her room. My friends became her friends, my interests became her interests, my achievements became things she quietly competed against without ever admitting that was what she was doing. I used to tell myself it was flattering. Imitation as the sincerest form of admiration, and all of that. It took me a long time to understand that what Sophie felt toward me was not admiration. It was envy, old and patient, the kind that waits for the right moment instead of announcing itself. I met Daniel Carter 3 years ago, at a mutual friend's dinner party, and I remember thinking, before he had even said more than a few sentences to me, that there was something steady about him. Not exciting in the loud, dramatic way some relationships are exciting, but steady in a way I had never had before, and did not know I needed until I felt it. Daniel is 31, kind in the unglamorous, everyday way that only reveals itself over time, reliable in the sense that he says what he means and does what he says. He proposed 2 years into our relationship, on an ordinary Tuesday evening in our kitchen, because he said he did not want to wait for some perfect, curated moment to ask me something he already knew the answer to. I said yes, before he had even finished the sentence. We planned a wedding for the following spring, small, warm, exactly the kind of day that felt like us. Sophie was one of my bridesmaids, of course. She was my sister. I never once considered leaving her out, even though some small, quiet part of me, a part one did not examine too closely at the time, felt a flicker of unease whenever I pictured her standing beside me at the altar. That unease turned out to be the only honest instinct I had that whole year. About a month before the wedding, I started noticing that Sophie was spending an unusual amount of time around Daniel. At first, I told myself it was normal. She was excited about the wedding, she wanted to bond with her future brother-in-law, and there was nothing strange about that. But the pattern kept repeating in ways that were harder to explain away. She texted him late at night, long after any reasonable excuse about wedding logistics could justify. She showed up at places he happened to be, always with some casual explanation ready, always phrased in a way that made it sound like pure coincidence. And whenever I brought up how it made me feel, whenever I tried to put words to the discomfort sitting in my stomach, she would tilt her head, give me that small, patient smile she has had since we were children, and say, "You're overthinking." I heard that phrase so many times in those weeks that it started to feel like a spell she was casting over me, one designed to make me distrust my own perception of reality. I would bring my concerns to Daniel too, hesitant, half embarrassed to even be voicing them, and he would reassure me every time. He told me Sophie was just being Sophie, that I knew how she was, that there was nothing behind any of it. I wanted so badly to believe him that I let myself, again and again, even as the small voice in the back of my mind kept insisting that something was wrong. A week before the wedding, that small voice finally had proof to point to. I was looking for my charger and picked up Sophie's phone by mistake, and a message notification lit up the screen before I could set it back down. It was from Daniel. Only a few words were visible in the preview, but they were enough to stop my breath in my chest. "She'll never know." I stood there in her bedroom doorway holding that phone like it was something radioactive, my mind racing through every possible innocent explanation and finding none of them convincing enough to quiet the roar building in my ears. Every late-night text, every coincidental appearance, every dismissive, "You're overthinking," suddenly rearranged itself into a single, devastating pattern in my head. I did not wait for an explanation. I did not even confront either of them that night. I simply felt something inside me go cold and final, the way a door sounds when it is not just closed but locked. The next morning, I called off the wedding. I will not pretend those days were anything but the worst of my life. I returned gifts I had not even opened yet. I made phone calls to vendors with a voice I did not recognize as my own, flat and mechanical, reciting the same sentence over and over, "The wedding will no longer be taking place." My mother cried on the phone. Friends sent messages I could not bring myself to answer. And through all of it, I kept picturing that single line of text glowing on Sophie's screen, and I kept thinking that the two people I trusted most in the world had found each other behind my back, in the 1 month I most needed them to be exactly who I believed them to be. Daniel did not accept my silence. He came to my apartment 3 days after I called off the wedding, and I almost did not let him in. But something in his face when I opened the door, some raw, wounded honesty that did not match the picture I had built of a man secretly betraying me, made me step aside instead of shutting the door on him. He told me everything, and he did not do it with vague reassurances this time. He showed me his phone, message by message, scrolling back through weeks of conversation with Sophie so I could read every word myself instead of having to trust his account of it. And what I found there was not a romance. It was something else entirely, something that took my understanding of my sister and turned it completely inside out. Sophie had spent that entire month trying to convince Daniel to call off our wedding himself, without ever telling me she was doing it. She told him, message after message, that I was not really in love with him, that I was only marrying him because I felt like it was time, that he deserved someone who wanted him the way she claimed I never had. She painted herself, in message after message, as someone who understood him better than I did, someone who saw a version of the relationship that supposedly justified walking away from it entirely. The words, "she'll never know," that had shattered my trust that night had nothing to do with an affair at all. They had been Sophie's own words, part of a message convincing Daniel that if he simply distanced himself from me quietly enough, I would never have to know the real reason the wedding fell apart, that she could manage the story however she wanted, as long as he cooperated. Daniel had refused, every single time. He told her, in messages I read with my own eyes, that he loved me, that nothing she said was going to change that, and that he thought she needed to examine why she was so determined to convince him otherwise. Sophie did not stop. She only escalated, becoming more insistent, more manipulative, more transparent in her intentions with each passing week, right up until the moment her plan produced an outcome she likely never anticipated. I had found the wrong message, misread the wrong context, and blown up my own wedding based on a partial truth that, once revealed in full, painted her as something far worse than an aspiring homewrecker. She had not wanted Daniel for herself. She had simply wanted me to lose him, which somehow felt like an even deeper, uglier kind of betrayal, because it meant none of it had ever been about love at all. It had only ever been about taking something that was mine. I sat with Daniel that night for hours, reading through every message twice, needing to be absolutely certain before I let myself feel anything. And when I finally allowed myself to believe him, the relief was so overwhelming that I cried harder than I had during any of the days I spent believing he had betrayed me. But relief for Daniel did not translate into forgiveness for Sophie. I confronted her a few days later, calmly, because I refused to give her the satisfaction of watching me fall apart the way I had the week before. I laid out everything Daniel had shown me, watched her face cycle through denial, then irritation, then, finally, something that looked almost like triumph, as if some small part of her was proud that she had come as close as she had to destroying what I built. She did not apologize. She told me I was being dramatic, that she was only looking out for me, that I would thank her one day for stopping me from making a mistake. She never once acknowledged the lie at the center of it all, the manufactured suspicion, the deliberate campaign to make me doubt the one person who had never actually given me a reason to. I ended contact with her that day, and I have not spoken to her since. It was not an easy decision, and it did not feel clean or satisfying the way people sometimes imagine cutting off a family member should feel. Sophie is still my sister. Somewhere in my memory, she is still the small girl who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms, the person I spent decades loving without condition, long before I understood that her feelings toward me had curdled into something else entirely. Letting go of her meant letting go of an entire imagined future too, birthdays and holidays and the kind of easy sisterly closeness I always assumed we would eventually grow into. Grieving a person who is still alive, still just a phone call away, is a strange and lonely kind of grief, one that does not come with the clear edges of a funeral, only an open wound that has to slowly, deliberately close on its own. Daniel and I did not rush back into wedding planning right away. We needed time to rebuild something that had been shaken at its foundation, even if the shaking had come from outside rather than between the two of us. We talked more honestly in the months that followed than we ever had before, about trust, about family, about what it meant to choose each other even when the people around us tried to make that harder. Slowly, carefully, the life we had been building before that terrible month found its footing again. A year later, we were married. It was a smaller wedding than the one we had originally planned, quieter, filled only with people I trusted completely, no uncertainty hiding behind any of the smiling faces in the room. My mother cried again, but this time for entirely different reasons. Daniel's hands were steady as he said his vows, and mine were steadier than I expected them to be too, considering everything it had taken to get to that particular afternoon. There was only one person missing from that day, one chair that stayed empty at a table set for family. Sophie was not there. She was not invited, and if I am honest, I did not spend the day wondering what she was doing instead. I spent it fully present in the life I had almost lost to a lie I had believed, and then fully found again in the truth someone finally had the courage to show me. Sometimes the deepest betrayal does not come from strangers. It comes from the people who know your heart the best, the ones who understand exactly which words will cut deepest, exactly which fears to whisper into the quiet spaces of your trust. I learned that lesson in the worst possible way, through the person I least expected to teach it to me, and I do not know if I will ever fully close that particular wound. But I know this much for certain. I chose to protect my own peace, even when it meant walking away from someone I had loved my entire life, and I do not regret that choice, not even on the hardest days. Could you ever forgive your own sister?